The millionaire's son lay still on the cold marble floor. His eyes were closed, his face pale, and his body trembled from shock. Beside him knelt Grace, the young maid, her hands shaking as she held something small, dark, and moving. "Grace, what did you do?" The butler gasped, frozen with fear. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. The grand doors burst open, and Mr. Caleb Thompson, the man whose wealth could buy nearly anything, stormed into the room. His face turned white with horror. "What happened to my son?" he shouted, rushing forward. Grace looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "I didn't hurt him, sir," she whispered, voice trembling. "I swear I was only trying to help." "Help?" Caleb barked, his voice echoing across the marble walls. "You touched my son? You went near him without my permission?" Grace slowly opened her hand. Inside was something strange and wet. Glistening under the light, something no one had ever seen before. Everyone in the room stepped back, faces pale with shock. The air turned heavy, thick with silence. Then a soft sound broke through it. "Dad." It came from the boy, the same boy who had been born deaf, who had never spoken a word in his life. For a long moment no one moved. Caleb stared at his son in disbelief, his heart pounding. And then he realized the maid had just done the impossible. Dear viewers, this is not a story about wealth or power. It's a story about love, faith, and the kind of miracle that money can never buy. Stay with me till the end, because what happens next will touch your heart and remind you that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from those we least expect. The Thompson mansion was grand, the kind of house where even silence had its own echo. Every chandelier sparkled, like sunlight caught in crystal. Every corner shone bright with polish. But behind all that beauty, something was missing. The house looked perfect, yet it felt empty, like a museum without laughter. Servants moved quietly through the halls. Everyone knew Mr. Caleb Thompson liked his home that way. Caleb was a man who lived for control. His days were filled with meetings, his nights with phone calls and contracts worth millions. He smiled in public but rarely at home. Behind his calm face hid a father who couldn't sleep because his only son, Ethan, had been born deaf. No doctor, no medicine, no expensive treatment had ever helped him. Caleb had flown across countries, meeting experts who promised miracles, but every time, he came home with the same heartbreaking silence. Ethan was 10 now. He had never heard the rain, never listened to his father's voice, never spoken a single word. The only sounds he knew were the shapes people made with their lips. Sometimes, he'd press his ear against the window, watching the wind move through the trees, as if trying to hear the secrets they whispered. The staff pitied him, some avoided him, afraid his silence carried bad luck. But one person saw him differently. Her name was Grace. Grace was new at the mansion, a young black maid in her mid-20s. She had come seeking work after her mother fell ill, leaving behind heavy hospital bills. Every day, she wore the same carefully washed uniform and tied her hair neatly in a bun. She worked quietly, never complained, never gossiped. But behind her calm eyes lived a heart filled with memories she could not forget. Grace once had a little brother, Daniel. He had lost his hearing after a strange infection when they were children. She remembered how her mother begged doctors for help, but no one listened. They couldn't afford it. Daniel died in silence, never hearing her voice again. Since that day, Grace carried a promise in her heart. If she ever met another child like him, she would never turn away. The first time Grace saw Ethan, he was sitting on the staircase, lining up toy cars in a perfect row. He didn't look up as she passed, but she noticed something in his eyes, loneliness, deep and familiar. From that day, Grace began leaving small gifts for him on the steps. A folded paper bird, a piece of chocolate wrapped in gold, a note with a tiny drawing. At first, Ethan didn't react. But one morning, she found the chocolate gone and the paper bird sitting beside his toys. Slowly, something began to change. When Grace cleaned the windows near his playroom, he would then come close. Watching her reflection in the glass, she'd wave and smile. He began waving back. Once, when she dropped a cup, he laughed silently, clutching his stomach. It was the first time anyone in the mansion had ever seen him smile. Day by day, Grace became the only person Ethan trusted. She taught him simple hand signs, and he taught her to find joy in small things. She didn't treat him like a patient. She treated him like a boy who deserved to be heard, even without words. But not everyone approved. One evening, while Grace was wiping the dining table, the head butler whispered sharply, "You should stay away from him. Mr. Thompson doesn't like staff getting close." Grace looked up, startled. "But he seems happier," she said quietly. "That's not your concern," he replied coldly. "You're here to clean, not to bond." Grace said nothing, but her heart disagreed. She knew what loneliness looked like, and she saw it every time she looked into Ethan's eyes. That night, when the staff went to their quarters, Grace sat alone by the kitchen window. The clock ticked softly. She thought of her brother Daniel, of how no one had cared enough to notice his pain. She whispered to herself, "I won't let that happen again." The next morning, Grace found Ethan in the garden, scratching his ear with a frown. He looked uncomfortable. She knelt beside him and gently signed, "Are you okay?" He shook his head. She leaned closer, tilting his head toward the sunlight. For a brief moment, she saw something that made her heart stop. Something dark, glimmering deep inside his ear. It looked like a tiny moving shadow. She blinked, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. She didn't touch him. She only smiled and signed softly, "Let's tell your father, okay?" But Ethan quickly shook his head. His hands moved fast. "No doctors." His eyes filled with fear as he signed again. "They hurt me." Grace froze. Pain flickered across his face, and in that instant, she understood everything. He wasn't just afraid, he was traumatized. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. The image of that dark thing inside his ear haunted her. What if it was serious? What if it was the reason he could never hear? She thought of calling someone, but she knew how things worked in that house. Without Mr. Thompson's permission, no one listened, and Mr. Thompson barely spoke to her at all. The next day, Ethan looked worse. He kept touching his ear, wincing in pain. Grace followed him into the playroom, worry heavy in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Lord, please guide me." When Ethan's tears filled his eyes again, Grace made a decision that would change everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver pin, the one she used to fix her uniform. She knelt beside him and said softly, "It's okay. I'll help you." Just then, the door creaked open behind her. Grace froze. She turned slowly, and there stood Mr. Caleb Thompson. His suit was perfect as always, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked in a low, commanding voice. Grace stood quickly, hiding the pin behind her back. "Sir, I'm sorry," she said nervously. "He was in pain. I was only trying to help." Caleb's eyes shifted from her to his son. Ethan sat quietly, holding his ear, blinking back tears. "You're not a doctor," Caleb said firmly. "If something's wrong with my son, you call me. You don't touch him." Grace lowered her head. "Yes, sir, I understand." Caleb sighed, running a tired hand across his face. "I've had too many people promise to help him. They all failed. I can't take chances anymore." His voice trembled slightly but hardened again. "You may go now." Grace nodded, holding back her tears. She wanted to explain, to tell him what she had seen, but his tone left no room for words. She turned and walked away, her steps heavy and slow. Out in the hallway, she leaned against the wall and whispered, "He doesn't see how much that boy is hurting." Hours passed. The mansion returned to its quiet rhythm. Maids polished furniture, the cook prepared dinner, and guards stood like statues outside. But inside, Grace's heart, the silence grew louder. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, about the fear in his eyes, the pain, and that strange dark thing she'd seen inside his ear. That night, in her small room near the laundry area, she sat on her bed with her Bible open beside her. She wasn't reading. She just stared at the pages, whispering, "Lord, what should I do?" The old clock ticked slowly. The memory of her brother came rushing back the way Daniel had looked at her, trying to say something before he died. She had promised never to watch another child suffer in silence. Grace stood suddenly. She couldn't wait any longer. Barefoot, she walked through the dark hallways. The mansion was silent, lit only by faint lamps. The air was cool and still. She stopped outside Ethan's room. The door was half open. Inside, the night lamp glowed softly. Ethan sat on his bed, hands pressed to his ear, eyes full of pain. Grace stepped inside quietly. "It hurts again," she signed gently. He nodded, tears glistening. Grace's heart ached. She knelt beside him and whispered, "Let me see." He hesitated, then slowly leaned forward. The warm light touched his small ear, and again, she saw it. Grace leaned closer, heart racing. The light from the lamp caught something deep inside Ethan's ear. It shimmered faintly, strange and dark, like a small living thing. Her breath quickened. For a second, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It looked alive, moving slowly, almost like it was hiding from the light. "Ethan," she whispered softly, her hands trembling. "Stay still, okay?" He looked at her, eyes wide with fear. His small fingers gripped her sleeve. "It's all right," she signed gently, trying to calm him. "I won't hurt you." But Grace's heart was pounding. She didn't know what it was. A bug, a worm, or something else entirely. She only knew one thing. Whatever it was, it didn't belong there. The boy whimpered quietly, holding his ear. Grace hesitated for a moment, then made a silent prayer. "Lord, give me strength." She took the small silver pin from her pocket again, the same one she used to fix her apron. Her hand shook, but she kept her voice steady. "It'll be okay," she whispered. "Trust me." Carefully, she brought the pin closer, trying to see better. The dark thing shifted again, glinting like wet ink. Grace held her breath, steadying her hand. The moment she touched it, Ethan flinched. Grace froze, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry, baby," she said, under her breath. "Almost done." She tried again, slow and careful, until the tiny shape began to move toward the light. And then, with a soft, sticky sound, it came out. Grace gasped. It was small, black, and alive, something between a worm and a shadow. It wriggled in her hand. And that was when Ethan's body went still. For a long moment, the world seemed to stop. Grace stared at the strange thing in her palm, horror creeping into her bones. Then Ethan opened his mouth. His lips trembled. "Dad," he whispered. Grace froze. Her hand went numb. She looked at the boy, at his eyes wide with shock, and then at the creature twitching in her palm. Before she could react, the door behind her burst open. "Grace, what did you do?" the butler shouted, his voice echoing through the marble room. Grace turned, her heart leaping to her throat. Footsteps thundered down the hall again. "Mr. Caleb Thompson rushed in, his face pale, His eyes locked on his son lying motionless on the floor. "What happened to my son?" he roared, running forward. Grace could barely speak. "I didn't hurt him, sir," she whispered, shakily. "I was only trying to help." "Help?" Caleb's voice broke like thunder. "You touched him? Without my permission?" Grace opened her trembling hand, revealing the dark, glistening thing. Gasps filled the room. Everyone stepped back, horror written on their faces. And then the silence broke. "Dad!" The soft word came again, clear as air. Caleb froze. The butler's jaw fell open. The maids gasped, crossing themselves. Ethan had spoken. The boy who had never made a sound in 10 years was looking up at his father. Lips moving. Voice trembling. But real. "Dad," he said again. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. Even Caleb, a man who never cried, felt his throat tighten. He dropped to his knees beside his son, touching his face with shaking hands. "Ethan, you spoke." The boy blinked, tears streaming down his cheeks. He touched his ear, confused but smiling weakly. Grace's heart swelled with emotion. She could hardly breathe. She had seen something beyond reason. Something no science could explain. Caleb looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief and awe. For once, the mighty man had no words. The thing in her hand stopped moving. Slowly, she placed it on a silver tray nearby. It looked lifeless now, like a shadow fading in light. No one in the room spoke. The only sound was the boy's quiet, shaky breath. That was the night everything changed in the Thompson mansion. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, touching the marble with warmth. The mansion that once echoed with silence now felt alive. Word spread quickly. The master's son spoke. Servants whispered it in the corridors. Cooks talked in hushed tones. And even the guards smiled at each other. But Grace stayed quiet. She didn't want fame or praise. She only wanted the boy to be okay. Caleb, however, couldn't rest. He called doctors, specialists, anyone who might explain what had happened. But no one could. The tests showed nothing wrong. Ethan's ears were clear, his voice perfectly normal. "Impossible," one doctor said, shaking his head. "It's like his hearing was never lost." Caleb stood silently, staring at his son, trying to understand. For years, he had spent fortunes chasing hope. And now, this young maid with nothing but faith and courage had done what no one could. That evening, he called Grace to his study. The large wooden desk between them felt heavier than ever. "Sit down," he said quietly. Grace obeyed, keeping her eyes low. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You risked my son's life last night." Grace's heart sank. She gripped her hands together. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean..." "But you also gave him back his voice," Caleb interrupted softly. His tone broke slightly. "I can't explain it. None of us can. But you did something I'll never forget." Grace looked up, surprised. "Sir, I only wanted to help him." Caleb nodded slowly. "I know." He took a deep breath. "You've reminded me of something I forgot long ago, that not everything precious can be bought." For the first time, his eyes softened. "Thank you, Grace." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "You don't need to thank me, sir. Just love him. That's all he needs." That night, Grace sat by her window again, watching the moonlight spill over the garden. She could hear faint laughter from upstairs, Ethan's laughter. It was light, clumsy, and full of joy. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering a prayer. "Thank you, Lord." But as she looked out into the night, her eyes fell on the tray she had left outside her door. On it, under a glass jar, lay the dark thing she had pulled from Ethan's ear. It didn't move. It looked dry, harmless. Yet something about it made her uneasy. She leaned closer and noticed something she hadn't before. A faint shimmer, almost like tiny veins glowing under its skin. Her stomach turned. "What are you?" she whispered. The jar trembled slightly. Grace jumped back. But when she looked again, it was still. She tried to shake off the fear, telling herself it was her imagination. But deep down, she knew whatever that thing was, it wasn't gone. Days passed. Ethan grew stronger, happier. He ran through the halls, laughing, speaking new words every day. The mansion, once silent, was now filled with life. Caleb watched his son with wonder, pride softening his once cold face. The staff smiled more, the air felt lighter, and yet Grace couldn't shake the unease in her heart. Every night, she checked the jar. Each time, the dark shape looked different, smaller one day, stretched the next. Sometimes it seemed to shift slightly, like it was breathing. She prayed harder. "Lord, protect this child." But one night, when she went to look again, the jar was empty. Her hands turned cold. She searched the floor, the corners, the shelves. Nothing. The dark thing was gone. And just as she turned toward the door, a faint whisper filled the room. It was soft, distant, almost like a breath. Grace froze. Her pulse quickened. Then silence. She clutched the cross around her neck, her heart pounding. "It's nothing," she whispered shakily. "It's just the wind." But she knew it wasn't. Outside, the night grew darker. A shadow moved across the hallway, and somewhere in the mansion, Ethan began to hum a tune no one had ever taught him. Grace's eyes widened, because the melody wasn't human. Something glistened deep inside, faint like wet glass in shade. This time, she was sure it did not belong there. Her breath caught and held, tight as a knot. "It's okay," she whispered, steadying her shaking voice. She promised, trying to calm herself. Her hand trembled as the metal touched the light. "Just hold still," she said, meeting Ethan's eyes. "All right," he whispered, fear flickering across his face. He nodded once, brave in his small way. She drew a slow breath and moved the pin closer. Her fingers shook so badly it almost slipped. The small dark shape slid deeper, hiding from light. "Please, Lord," she breathed. "Guide me. Guide my hand." Then she felt it soft, sticky, wrong against the pin. She hooked it gently and began to pull. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then something slid out, wet and shining. It fell into her open palm and wriggled. Black, round, slightly moving. Like ink come alive. Grace froze where she knelt, heart almost stopping. She didn't know what it was. Only wrongness. It did not belong in a child's ear. Ethan's eyes went wide, thoughts racing fast. He touched his ear, blinking, shocked and confused. Then he gasped and pressed both hands down. Grace leaned forward, frightened for him, whispering, "Ethan, are you okay? Tell me. Please." His fingers rose to his throat, then paused. His mouth opened and a sound stumbled out. It was small, rough, broken, but it was real. Grace went still, as if lightning struck silence. Her lips parted. Her eyes filled with tears. You spoke, she said, breath shaking. The sound came again, soft but clearer. Grace, he said, like a word learning itself. Her heart stopped and burst open at once. He had said her name. He had named love. She dropped the pin as her hands shook. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You can hear me?" Ethan flinched suddenly and covered both ears. The ticking wall clock felt loud as thunder. Fear filled his eyes, but wonder lived there. Grace moved closer, tears running freely now. "It's okay," she said, voice quiet and warm. "It's okay. You're hearing for the first time." He looked around, eyes jumpy and bright. Confusion and shock chased thoughts across his face. The curtains breathed as the wind touched them. He pointed and asked, "Sound?" with a tremble. Grace nodded, smiling through shaking relief. "Yes," she said. "That sound." The wind's voice. She did not notice the slow door opening. The butler stood there, eyes wide and stunned. "What on earth?" he breathed, fear in it. Grace turned, startled by his voice at once. "Please don't shout," she whispered quickly, begging. "He can hear now. I don't know how, but he can hear. He really can." The butler stepped back, disbelief freezing his face. He lifted his chin and raised his voice. "Mr. Thompson, come quickly," he shouted hard. Ethan flinched and clapped his hands over ears. The loud sound stabbed like a raw blade. He whimpered, small and frightened by noise. Grace hugged him gently, soft arms steady. "It's okay, it's okay. Don't be scared." Heavy footsteps boomed across the marble hallway. Caleb appeared at the doorway, face cut pale. His voice hit like thunder against quiet. "What is going on here?" he demanded, fierce. The butler pointed, voice shaking with accusation. "Sir," she was touching him again, "your son. And look at the boy," he cried urgently. Caleb's eyes swung from butler to child. Ethan clung to Grace, shaking, lips moving. He tried to shape air into something. Then it came. A single word, like sunrise. "Dad," Ethan said. And the room went still. Silence held everyone by throat and heart. Caleb's breath caught fast and would not move. His body froze like time had broken glass. For years he had dreamed of that word. Grace looked at him through helpless tears. "He can hear, sir," she whispered softly. "He really can. He really, truly can." Caleb did not move. "Verse 9. Verse 9. Verse 9. Verse 9. Verse 9. Verse 9. The butler fell silent. Even the clock seemed to forget ticking. Then Ethan spoke again, voice weak but real. "Dad, don't be mad," he said gently. Caleb's legs wavered, strength bending with feeling. His eyes glistened against the stubborn years. "That's my boy's voice," he whispered to himself. But shock shifted quickly into hot anger. "What did you do to him?" he cried. "What did you put in his ear?" Grace shook her head, terror mixing with grief. "I didn't hurt him, sir," she said. "I only pulled out something inside there." "Something?" he thundered. "You could have killed him." Running feet burst against the hall's calm skin. Guards rushed in, faces hard, shoulders squared. "Sir, please," Grace cried, searching his eyes. "Listen to me. He can hear now." But Caleb's voice turned cold as winter. "Take her away," he ordered without blinking. Ethan screamed, "No!" A bright, breaking shout. It was the loudest word of his life. Guards pulled Grace by both arms. Unkind. The last thing she heard was him crying. They dragged her to the security room downstairs. Her wrists were cuffed. Her tears had dried. 2 guards stood by the door, unspeaking. From the hall, she heard Ethan's faint crying. Every time he shouted her name, it broke her. She whispered into the hard air, pleading, "God, please let them see my heart. Please show them I never meant harm." Upstairs, chaos swallowed the mansion's cold order. Caleb paced the living room, mind burning. His son had spoken, his son had heard. The impossible had happened in one shattering night. 10 years of hopeless rooms had collapsed suddenly. A maid had done it in minutes, unthinkable. The butler hovered, voice low and careful. "Sir, maybe we should call the hospital. The boy might be in danger from this." Caleb nodded fast, a decision cutting air. "Yes. Call them. Call them right now. Tell them to send an ambulance immediately. I want every specialist ready before arrival." Within minutes, red lights bled across stone. Paramedics entered, steady hands and clipped voices. They lifted Ethan onto a stretcher with care. The boy tried speaking. Small voice, trembling. "Dad, Grace." Grace helped. He managed through fear. Caleb could not look at Grace at all. He followed the stretcher, heart split and unsure. Was this a miracle? Or a fatal mistake? He did not know which truth held him. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Machines hummed and beeped in clean rhythms. White coats moved fast, voices full of purpose. Caleb stood behind glass, hands at fists. He watched them test, check, write, repeat. His hands trembled, a feeling he barely remembered. He had faced investors and world leaders. But before his son, he felt helpless. A doctor finally stepped out to speak. "Mr. Thompson," he said, careful and slow. "We ran some quick tests on him. His hearing seems restored for now, at least." Caleb blinked at the words like stones. "Temporarily?" he asked. "What does that mean?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, uneasy. "We don't know yet," he admitted quietly. "We found irritation in his ear canal, and some foreign substance, likely biological in origin. We'll need to run deeper studies soon." "Foreign substance?" Caleb asked, breath turning tight. "What kind of substance are we discussing?" The doctor hesitated, eyes shifting with nerves. "Something biological," he repeated, very carefully. "We've never seen anything exactly like it. It could have been there for years." Caleb turned pale, like heat had vanished. "Years?" he said. "All those specialists missed it? All those scans, tests, and endless treatments missed it?" The doctor did not meet his eyes. "Sometimes these cases are complicated," he offered. "Complicated. Complicated." Caleb echoed, voice low and deadly. "I paid you people millions," he said. "Every year I flew him worldwide for care. You scanned every part of him, every time. And you missed something inside his ear?" The doctor swallowed and lowered his tone. "Sir, maybe you should sit down," he said. "There's something else. You should see this." He opened a folder and slid it over. Caleb frowned and pulled the papers close. He read the reports, lines thick with jargon. His eyes moved faster, burning through every page. Then he stopped at a line near bottom. Printed words stared back like a loaded gun. "Maintain diagnosis for continued funding approval. Thompson account remains active," the page added. Caleb's mouth went dry, heart turning stone. He read it again, to crush all doubt. It said what he feared most in life. They had lied. They had starved his child. His son had never been truly treated. They had kept him deaf to keep money, He slammed the folder shut, hands shaking hard. "You monsters," he whispered through tight teeth. "You sold my son's pain for profit." The doctor looked down, shame heavy as lead. "Sir, I had no knowledge of the board. They handle those accounts," he said weakly. Caleb didn't hear another word he spoke. He turned away and left the office. Every step felt heavier than his own name. Guilt spread across his chest like iron. He had trusted them because hope felt easier. He believed their promises to escape his fear. At the hallway's end, he saw Ethan. The boy sat upright on a hospital bed. A fresh bandage rested gently near his ear. He looked small and fragile, but alive. Caleb's chest tightened against a sudden storm. Ethan looked up and truly heard him. "Dad," Ethan said, voice shaky but real. Caleb stopped like gravity had changed directions. Tears rose before he could swallow pride. He stepped close and sat beside him. His hands trembled, touching Ethan's cheek. "You can really hear me?" "Cried," he whispered. Ethan nodded and tried a small smile. "Where's Grace?" he asked, searching the room. The question hit Caleb like a breaking wave. He looked away. Strength pushed past shame. "She's not here," he answered, voice unsteady. "Bring her," Ethan said. Soft, but certain. "She helped me. She isn't bad, Dad." Caleb's throat tightened with honest guilt. For a long breath, he could not speak. Then he stood and turned toward the nurse. "Tell the guards to release the maid," he said. "Bring her here. Bring her to us." Minutes stretched until the door opened again. Grace walked in with tired, careful steps. Her uniform was wrinkled from the struggle. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed and calm. She looked like someone emptied of tears. Ethan's whole face lit bright when he saw her. "Grace," he said. Weak but joyfully clear. Grace covered her mouth in a soft gasp. "You can still speak," she whispered, astonished. He nodded and gave a small laugh. "You helped me," he said. Simple and true. Caleb stood silent, watching both of them. Something cracked open deep inside his chest. Pride thinned, anger cooled. Disbelief loosened. What remained was guilt, heavy and honest. He looked at Grace and found his voice. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "How did you even think to look?" Grace stood straighter, but her hands trembled. Her eyes held the ache of old memory. "I had a little brother," she said softly. "His name was Daniel. He lost hearing." A strange infection took his world to silence. "We had no money. Doctors turned us away. He died without hearing my voice again." Her words fell like stones into still water. "I promised I wouldn't look away again. If I saw a child lost in silence, I would try. I would risk something." She looked at Ethan, then back at Caleb. "I saw him touch his ear with pain. I thought maybe something was inside. I didn't know what. I only knew wrongness. I prayed. I tried. That is all." She glanced at the jar she had kept. It moved like a shadow when I pulled. "I still don't know what it was." Caleb listened, and shame tightened his jaw. He had caged his heart in exact control. He had trusted empires and ignored small mercies. He had feared hope unless it wore titles. Now hope stood here wearing a maid's uniform. He looked at Ethan's bandage and breathing. He looked at Grace's shaking, stubborn courage. His voice softened into something unarmored. "I am sorry," he said, meaning everything. "I am sorry for doubting your intentions. I am sorry for what I allowed. I am sorry I let men sell silence." His eyes closed as he breathed out. "Thank you, Grace," he said. "Steady now. You gave my son what money couldn't find. The doctor cleared his throat at the door. "Mr. Thompson," he said, face grave and thin. "We'll need to keep him for observation. We must study whatever you removed." Grace nodded. "Because truth wanted light. It's under a jar by my door," she said. "It changed shapes. I was afraid of it." The doctor frowned and scribbled quick notes. "We'll have a team collect it tonight. Please tell us everything you observed." Grace described the glisten, the soft stickiness, the way it hid from light inside his ear, how it shrank and stretched under glass later, how it seemed to move when no one touched. The doctor listened, curiosity fighting his fear. Caleb spoke, voice back to iron and flame. "Run real tests," he said. "Run all of them. No delays. No board approvals. No excuses now. If anyone interferes, I will end them." The doctor nodded without meeting his eyes. Ethan reached for Grace's hand and held it. His fingers were small but sure and warm. "Don't go," he whispered, eyes wide still. Grace smiled, tears bright but not breaking. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." Caleb watched the space between their hands. He saw something priceless grow there: trust. Not the trust of contracts, but of care. He had bought the world, yet missed this. He breathed in slowly and let pride leave. Nurses came and checked Ethan's pressure. They measured breath and watched his eyes. A soft machine hummed like a lullaby. Outside, rain began to tap the windows. Ethan flinched, then grinned and pointed. "Sound," he whispered, wonder filling his face. Grace laughed. "A quiet bell in night." "Yes," she said. "That is the rain." He listened, eyes wet with the new world. He was hearing the sky learn to speak. Caleb looked at the glass jar's absence. He looked at the folder still on table. He thought of boardrooms and polished lies. He thought of planes, hotels, empty promises. He thought of nights spent buying more hope. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I won't fail you again," he whispered. "Not with money. Not with silence. Ever." Grace closed her eyes and breathed relief. "Thank you," she said. He needed to hear that. The hallway lights dimmed toward hospital evening. Shadows softened. Machines kept their quiet chorus. A nurse returned with a small sealed container. "We found the jar in the maid's corridor," she said. "We transferred the specimen safely. It's unusual," she added, struggling for words. Caleb nodded, jaw set in a new vow. "Give it to the lab and watch them. No reports hidden. No words changed ever. Every finding comes straight back to me." Grace stood by the bed's left side. Caleb stood on the right, close and quiet. Ethan lay between them, small but brave. He studied their faces as if reading. "Family?" he asked, uncertain but hopeful still. Grace looked at Caleb, and then Ethan. She nodded and touched his forehead softly. "Yes," she said. "We're here with you." Caleb's mouth trembled, but he nodded too. "Yes, son, we're right here with you." Silence gathered, but it wasn't empty. It was full of breath, hope, and mercy. Ethan listened to the rain's patient rhythm. Grace listened to a prayer become answer. Caleb listened to his own pride breaking. And somewhere far from money's bright rooms, a father finally learned how to hear. He heard the word, Dad, not as victory, but as gift, undeserved and deep and new. He reached across and held Grace's hand. "Thank you," he said again, voice certain, "for seeing him when I only saw problems, for staying when rules said walk away, for giving him what all my money couldn't." Grace shook her head, humbled and firm. "I only did what love required," she said. Love looks. Love tries. Love does not run. Ethan smiled, eyes closing as rain sang. He whispered one more word. Sweet. And small. Home, he said. And the room believed him. Outside, the storm washed old dust from roads. Inside, a boy learned the names of sounds. Inside, a maid kept a brave promise. Inside, a father laid down his armor. And the shadow in the jar met science. Truth would face it under bright white lamps. The board would answer for its long hunger. Caleb would not allow another stolen day. He stood watch beside his son and Grace. He chose the harder road. To listen. Hours passed. Like new water through stone. The doctor returned with tired, careful eyes. We'll keep him tonight for safety, he said. Tomorrow, we'll know much more for certain. Caleb nodded. He could wait with purpose. Waiting meant something now. Faith with open eyes. He pulled a chair closer to the bed. Grace did the same on the other side. They sat as the rain softened toward dawn. And three hearts practiced hearing. Together. When the nurse dimmed the lights to low, Ethan whispered, "Tell me another sound." Grace smiled and pointed toward Caleb's chest. "Listen," she said. "Hear your father breathe." Ethan closed his eyes and heard it then, steady, warm. A promise learning its pace. He reached out and squeezed Grace's fingers. He reached out and found his father's hand. Between their hands, the night found meaning. Between their hands, silence finally spoke. "Even think to look inside his ear?" Caleb asked. Grace hesitated. Her voice dropped to a careful hush. "I saw him touch it every day," she said. "He was hurting. I thought something small was stuck. I didn't want to harm him, but I couldn't watch." Caleb's eyes softened, the hardness finally bending. "And you pulled that thing out?" he murmured. She nodded once, steady but shaken by memory. "I don't know what it was, sir," she said. "It moved. It looked old, like it lived there." Caleb turned toward the doctor, grief sharpening anger. "All these years," he said, voice trembling with rage. "Not one of you checked him properly, not once." The doctor's shoulders fell under the weight of truth. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," he said. "This shouldn't happen." Caleb exhaled slowly, eyes shining against the light. He looked back at Grace, quiet and brave. "You saw what none of them did," he said, "because you actually looked." His voice gentled. Grace lowered her head and shook it softly. "I didn't do it for thanks, sir," she said. "I did it because I couldn't let him suffer." Caleb swallowed hard, guilt rising through pride. "I thought money could fix everything," he whispered. "I was wrong." The words settled like stone. The room went still, holding breath and hum. Only the machines beside Ethan kept time. Finally, Caleb spoke again. The edge faded. "Grace, I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have listened. Fear blinded me completely." Grace shook her head with gentle understanding. "You're a father," she said softly. "You were scared. You were afraid to lose him. I understand." Caleb's eyes glistened as he nodded slowly. A new respect moved quietly across his face. As the night calmed, he sat by Ethan. He held his small hand and stayed close. Ethan leaned against him, sleepy but smiling. Grace stood near the door, watching carefully. For the first time, peace truly filled the room. It wasn't that cold silence the mansion knew. It was warm, the kind that follows tears. Yet deep inside, Caleb felt another truth. This was not the ending of the story. If the hospital lied, others likely had too. He would uncover more than he imagined tonight. And this time, He would not stay silent. Morning came slowly. Sun shy at the window. It rose as if unsure what night revealed. The hospital corridors stayed quiet and pale. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat in thought. Elbows on knees, he stared at the floor. His mind replayed each wrong turn and signature. He trusted white coats more than his heart. He signed checks but avoided hard questions. He let them turn his son into business. It broke him to finally see it. Grace walked up with a paper cup. He didn't notice until she spoke gently. "You should drink this," she said softly. "You've been awake all night," she added. Caleb looked up, eyes red and tired. "You didn't have to bring that," he said. Grace sat beside him, calm and present. "You didn't have to believe me either." They sat in silence, but not emptiness. This quiet felt kind, almost healing them. "The doctors admitted it," Caleb said quietly. "They knew. They hid it for money." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. "That's cruel," she whispered. "Pain in it." Caleb nodded, the truth cutting deeper. "I spent years building systems and programs," he said. "I thought I was helping the world. But I see my world listen to money." Grace held his eyes and answered simply. "Then change it," she said. "You can." He turned to her with new purpose. "You're right," he said. "I will." Hours later, he called a press conference urgently. They used the hospital's conference room upstairs. Reporters filled the space, cameras flashing hard. No one knew why he called them. Caleb stepped up, calm but iron-willed. Grace stood quietly in the back corner. He began slowly, each word heavy with meaning. "For 10 years I was told my son wouldn't hear," he said. "I paid for the best doctors and technology. I believed every promise that money bought. But last night, a maid did what experts couldn't. She gave my son back his hearing." The crowd murmured. Cameras clicked faster. "What we discovered is worse than I imagined," he continued. "My son's condition was not fate. It was profit. He was kept sick so people got paid." The room fell silent, stunned by his charge. Caleb lifted a folder, thick with papers. "These documents prove everything," he said steadily. "Signed by those who swore to heal. They chose greed instead of compassion," he said. "This is what happens when money replaces mercy." He paused, eyes down, then raised them again. "I was part of that world," he said. "I ignored what truly mattered. That changes now. I'm launching a new foundation today," he declared. "Free medical care for every child with hearing issues, no matter where they live or what they have." Soft clapping began, then grew with emotion. Some reporters wiped their eyes, moved deeply. "And the first leader of that mission is Grace." Heads turned sharply toward her corner. Grace froze, hand flying to her mouth. Caleb smiled, warmth steady in his eyes. "She taught me what it means to listen, not with money, but with the heart." After the conference, the halls emptied slowly. Caleb found Grace outside the front entrance. The air felt cool, the sun was gentle. She still looked shocked and overwhelmed. "Sir, you don't need to give me anything," she said. "I only did what was right," she added. Caleb shook his head with quiet certainty. "You didn't just help my son," he said. "You opened my eyes to what matters. People matter more than power and polish." She smiled faintly, relief soft on her face. "I'm glad Ethan is okay," she said. "That's all I wanted from the beginning." Caleb's expression softened with fatherly pride. "He keeps asking for you," he said. "He won't stop saying your name." Her smile deepened. Tears warmed her eyes. "He's a brave boy," she whispered honestly. They returned to Ethan's room together. He sat up, rolling a small toy car. He looked up and grinned at the door. "Grace," he called, voice bright and tender. Grace's heart melted as she hurried over. She hugged him gently, careful of bandages. I missed you, she whispered against his hair. Ethan laughed softly, a new and shining sound. You sound happy, he said, watching her. That's because I am, she answered, smiling. Caleb watched quietly, heart finally understanding love. It was simple, patient, and did not boast. No grand words, no polished speeches, only presence. The kind of love that chooses to stay. For the first time, he felt real peace. Days later, the mansion felt different everywhere. The air once heavy now carried laughter. Ethan ran through halls, feet tapping lightly. He spoke slowly, carefully, like learning music. Every word felt precious, bright, and new. Grace returned to work, but not as maid. Caleb brought her into the household with trust. Not staff family, in how they treated her. Evenings found them together in the garden. Caleb reviewed foundation reports with fierce focus. Grace taught Ethan new words and meanings. Ethan laughed at sounds he once missed. Sometimes Caleb simply watched them both. The two people who changed his life completely. In those moments, peace settled like evening light. One sunset painted the sky, soft orange. Ethan looked up from a colored drawing. Dad, can I say something? He asked. Caleb smiled warmly. Of course, son. Ethan pointed at Grace, speaking with care. She's my hero, he said, voice bright. Grace covered her face, holding back tears. Caleb looked at her with a proud smile. She's mine too, he said softly, truthfully. Later that night, the house slept quietly. Caleb stood at his study window, thinking. The moon lit the garden and fountain. That fountain once sounded like empty silence. Tonight, it ran steady and alive again. Grace passed by the doorway, steps unhurried. You're still awake? She asked gently. Caleb nodded, a small smile forming. Just thinking, he said. About many things. About how small voices can change everything. Grace smiled, a calm light in eyes. That's true, she said, with soft certainty. They stood in the good kind of silence, the kind that speaks without needing words. Caleb turned toward her, gratitude unguarded now. Thank you, Grace, he said, steady and sincere. You didn't just give my son hearing. You gave mine back as well, he said. She lowered her eyes, humble and honest. Sometimes we just need someone to listen. Caleb nodded, promise clear in his gaze. And this time, I will, he answered. Outside, the fountain kept its gentle song. Inside, laughter floated from Ethan's room, a sound they would never take for granted. For the first time, the Thompson house changed. It wasn't a palace of cold silence. It became a home filled with living sound. The sound of love. Soft. Present. Unafraid. Dear viewers, silence isn't only inside ears. Often it settles quietly inside our hearts. We chase success and comfort and forget listening. We stop hearing the ones who need us. Mr. Caleb had every power money buys. But a maid, with simple kindness, changed him. She opened his ears and opened his soul. She didn't heal with magic or machines. She healed with attention, courage, and love. Grace didn't just help a boy hear. She taught a father how to listen. That lesson became the greatest miracle here. If you've felt unseen, unheard, or forgotten, remember, somewhere, someone like Grace still quietly exists. Someone who listens when the world stays silent. Sometimes that's all it takes for hope. To bring life back and love back. To remind us what loving truly means. If this story touched your heart today, please like the video and subscribe gently. Turn on notifications so you don't miss more. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Share what you learned from Grace's brave story. Your words might inspire someone to listen with their heart, deeply and kindly, and maybe change a life the way she did.